All right, welcome Moxyball fans to the Sunday, June 26th MLB DFS podcast. I'm Jared. I'm here with Zach.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Bit of a delay there. Never knows when to chime in or not. What we're going to do today is try to keep this about 15, 20 minutes like we normally do, give you some really good insight into who we like for the upcoming slate on Sunday. Even though we're recording this Saturday afternoon, we have a really good idea of what's going to happen tomorrow, who's taking the mound, who's likely to be in and out of the lineup, etc. And we'll help break down exactly how we're going to attack what's going to be a really busy Sunday slate. So let's get right down to it and jump right in. So one of the things I like to do really is look at trends in particular and try to capitalize on those trends from a DFS perspective. It's one of the most effective ways I've been able to do well with my contests and become a profitable DFS player over time. So let's talk about one trend in particular, Zach, that you're seeing over the last 7 days. With baseball, recency is very important, especially from a hitting perspective. So what's something over the last week that you want to exploit tomorrow?
I'm not going to go over the last week. I'm going to go over the whole season because it's something we were actually talking about before we went live. And that's the crazy splits of certain teams, like the Padres, for instance. How nobody seems to be using teams like the Padres or the Rays when they're versing left-handed pitching. Against right-handed pitching, you want to attack them with the pitchers, but against left-handed pitching, you really want to use those two teams and attack the opposing team's pitcher. The Padres rank 5th in team WOBA against left-handed pitchers. The Rays are 2nd, but against right-handed pitchers, those numbers just drop drastically. Of course, the Padres are one of the worst teams. They alternate between the Braves for last on a daily basis. And then the Rays are 25th, and they have a crazy high strikeout rate of 25.2%. So I'm always looking for teams that have crazy splits because you can always get them under-owned, and they're just always in good spots when they have splits like that. So that's something I always keep a look at. You can do 7 days, but I'm more of a whole season kind of guy. So that's the one stat I like to look at.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's something that any listener or viewer here can totally kind of put in their pocket and use all season long, frankly. It's not just something that's going to affect you on the Sunday slate. That's one thing I know we've been talking about it and exploiting it for our own selves lately. But I mean, like the Padres against the lefty, for example, I mean, you gotta get all over that. I mean, they hit them extremely well. They've really started to turn that engine on, and not many people do. So it's a great way to get some low owned value. For me, the one thing that when I think about what I tried to accomplish just for today's podcast to talk about a 7-day trend, it's Corey Seager. I mean, he doesn't have a ton of home runs over the last week, but the dude's been hitting the cover off the ball. His average over the last week's over 500. And that's before we get into Saturday night's game. And on Sunday, he's going to be facing off against a rookie. His name's actually Chad Cull. I've never seen him before, but I looked up his stats prior to jumping on the podcast. And as a minor league pitcher, I mean, he's a very, 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 very mediocre talent with, a 5 or 6 K per 9, which usually you take a 2 to 3 off of that in the majors. So, I mean, he could end up being a bit like a Justin Nicolino in that he's a very high contact pitcher, may not walk a ton of guys, but he's a righty, throws strikes, he's very, very hittable contact pitcher. And a guy like Corey Seager that's making all kinds of hard contact right now has a great chance to be a very productive play on Sunday. So I'm going to be all over that. So let's just, on the heels of talking about a guy like Chad Cull, let's actually flip that on its head and talk about some other pitchers. Who are the two that you want to pay up for on Sunday there, Zach?
Well, I know Kershaw's pitching. You can never go wrong with him. The Pirates aren't the best matchup, but because they are 6th. I'm sorry, I believe 6th in Team WOBA. I'm sorry, 8th in Team WOBA against left-handed pitchers, but they strike out a lot at 25% Team K rate. But I'm not really looking at Kershaw. I'm looking at Johnny Cueto for a little bit of savings. He's got the Phillies' 3rd lowest Team WOBA against right-handed pitching. He's a huge 245 favorite. The Phillies only projected for 2.6 runs. He's gone at least 6 innings while not giving up more than 2 runs in his past 9 starts. So for a little bit of savings with a cooler field game in play, I'm going to go with Johnny Cueto and cash. And GPP, you got to look at Strasburg if he's able to play. He said he's going to be able to play. The back injury does give me a little scares me a little bit, but he's first in the Brewers. They had a highest Team K rate against right-handed pitching at 26.1%. Strasburg is striking out batters at elite rate once again. 11.42 K through 9, 31.9% K rate, 11.5 swing and strike rate. And he's a lot cheaper than all the other pitchers on this, all the other studs on the slate. And he has more upside than probably anybody.
Yeah, I like both of those guys. I think Cueto's a really nice pivot off of some of the more elite guys. He has a great matchup. I also like Strasburg for GPPs. The one other guy, and you mentioned him already, is going to be Kershaw. I definitely subscribe to the belief that you pay up for Kershaw even when it's maybe a bit more of an average matchup. His skill set and his consistency is remarkable. And in a game like MLB, from a DFS perspective, you need to bank on what you can count on the most, and that's your pitcher. He's going to get the ball. He's going to go every single pitch, every single inning, for example, as long as his team's in it. And his profile gives him by far the highest fantasy point floor. And I'll be playing him, frankly, in pretty much every lineup that I'm going to be playing tomorrow. The one other guy I do want a bit of exposure to at the elite level is Strasburg, like you said, for GPPs. I can't trust him in cash games just yet because of that back injury, like you mentioned. But I mean, he's having the best, probably arguably the best season of his career. He's got like 11.4 K per 9 and a sub-3 ERA, and all everything else we look at, the FIP, Sierra, the XFIP, everything supports that ERA where it is. So for a guy that's got that kind of high floor, high ceiling with such a great K rate, I think you got to look his way, especially because he is going to be a little bit cheaper, and actually on certain sites a fair bit cheaper than Kershaw. So I'm with you there. Flipping over to the bats, what's one stud bat that you're actually targeting on Sunday?
I'm going with Nolan Arenado of the Rockies. It's a cooler field game against
Arenado.
Arenado. I just woke up. You got to excuse me. I mean, he's facing a left-handed pitcher at home in coolers. He's slashing 371, 500, 714, 343 ISO, 495 WOBA. Corbin is not a good pitcher. He's allowing righties to slug 475 with a 349 WOBA. He's not that expensive for him being at Coolers Field. The pricing's not out for FanDuel yet, but on DraftKings, he's only 5.1K, so that's actually a good price for him compared to what you're normally going to get him for, and not actually upper fives. I just think he probably has the highest floor of any hitter, minus the hitter I'm going with next.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't really think we have to worry too much about his price moving more than $100 or $200 on FanDuel as well. I mean, the biggest movement that we have for guys in Coors is before the first game of that series starts. So he's going to be where he is. He's looking good right now. I like that pick a lot. I'm not going crazy over Coors. I definitely will have a little bit of exposure for cash game purposes, but I have a sneaking suspicion we may not see like a 12 to 15 run game with Bettis and Corbin. They're both actually pitching pretty decently well right now, and I don't necessarily feel like you need to run over there. The one guy that I'm actually going to be all over, and I'll call him a stud, but he's kind of more like a mid-range play, is Shin-Soo Choo. He's hitting the cover off the ball right now. He's got a career, I think it's a 392 WOBA against righties. He absolutely destroys them. And the Rangers are projected for 5 runs at the moment. Considering we only have DraftKings pricing to look at, he's $4,100, which is very reasonable when you look at everyone else that's in a good spot at the same position. So I'm going to certainly have exposure to that Texas offense as they're facing Clay Buchholz and playing very well right now. And I definitely think that this is a great spot, especially with him hitting at the top of the lineup right now for Texas. So he's a guy outside of Coors that I'd certainly want in my lineup. So Zach, value-wise, who are you looking at on Sunday?
All right, I'm going to another third baseman, and then I'm going to give you outfielder as well, since I already gave you third baseman. Danny, all right, help me out with the last name, Jared. Vallecina. I don't know how to pronounce people.
Danny Valencia.
I can't pronounce people's last names. He just kills left-handed pitching. He has a 417 average, 462 on-base percentage, 792 slugging, ISO 375, and a WOBA 522, and he's only 3,800. And Hector Santiago is not a good pitcher at all. I'm going to talk about his numbers a little later, but for me, he's just way too cheap at 3,800. He's actually a must-play for me. I don't know. I'm going to have exposure to both players, but I think in cash games, I'm going with Danny Boy for the big savings because his floor is just too high.
Yeah, yeah. I think especially with Hector Santiago being a fly ball pitcher, I think that really helps you out because it gives you a nice potential for, a dinger day for Valencia too.
Yeah, and the outfielder I really like, Ryan Rayburn. We talk about him a lot against the left-handed pitching. He's only 3,900. It's at Coolers. Rayburn since last season slugging 560 with an ISO 261 and a WOBA 4.3 against left-handed hitters. That's another must-play for me. Anytime I can get a guy who's going to hit fifth or sixth with those kind of numbers in Coolers Field for under 4K, I'm playing them.
Yeah, I can understand that. I'm not super crazy, like I said, about Coors, but I certainly get the play, and I'm not always right. So I totally get that. The one guy from a value perspective, I'm going more extreme value, especially for those of us that are going to be paying up for a really expensive starter on the slate is Steven Moya. We're going to talk about him a little bit more too, but I'm not crazy about the matchup. He's facing Josh Tomlin, who's a righty. I do like that it's the left-handed batter versus the right-handed pitcher. Don't get me wrong, and Tomlin is very much a contact-oriented pitcher, but he has been very good at keeping hitters off balance this year. And although he doesn't really have a very high K rate, he does a lot of damage with kind of like medium and soft contact. So the thing with him though is that he's only $2,400 on DraftKings, which is just absolutely way too cheap for a guy that's got the plus split and has some serious power potential. So if you're going to be starting a guy like Kershaw and maybe even doubling down and starting another guy like a Cueto or a Strasburg or maybe even a Jose Fernandez with them on DraftKings, you're going to be looking for some savings and getting a guy like Moya with that power potential in what could yield 4 or 5 runs for Detroit is certainly a great value at $2,400. So don't necessarily love the play overall, but it's kind of the smart play. And sometimes you just got to go with that and use that savings to pay up elsewhere for guys like Valencia, like you mentioned, or even Arenado or some other Coors bats. So that's what I'm thinking in terms of value there. What about some stacks? So I think a really good thing to give our listeners and readers on Moxyball.com is high floor stacks to consider for MLB DFS. So what do you like that you feel is kind of safe from a teams to target on from a hitting perspective on Sunday?
I know you're not too high on the Coolers Field game, but I'm always in Coolers. I mean, either side, the Rockies or the Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks have a 6 projected run total right now. The Rockies have 6.5 runs. You can't go wrong right there. Even if it's only a 6-5 game or a 7-4 game, that's still more runs than most teams are going to score. So, I mean, it's just picking the right ones. I don't normally spend up at Coolers Field very often. I normally look for the value plays, your Ryan Rayburns, your Nick Cumleys, your Michael Bourne, who's going to be really cheap on a site like FanDuel. Those are some high floor guys I look at. But another team I'm looking at is the Rangers against Clay Buchholz. Buchholz shouldn't be in the rotation anymore. He's only in there because I don't even know why. They put him to the bullpen, and now they have him back in the rotation for some reason. He has a FIP of 5.71, a home run in the 9 of 1.77, a whip of 1.41, and he really struggles against left-handed hitters. They're slashing 308, 411, 496 with a 390 WOBA, and the Rangers are just full of left-handed bats. You can go ahead and stack the Rangers. They're projected for 5.1 runs, and they're going to give you a really good value on both sites as well.
Yeah, I like them a lot too. And I should clarify, although I was saying I'm not like super high on the Coors game, I will have exposure in cash games, full stop. It would be silly not to. I'm not necessarily going to go full stack. That's kind of what I'm trying to say, is because I think that there are some other really good positions to have exposure to, like the Rangers, like you mentioned. They were actually one of the teams I was going to mention against Buchholz, who does not pitch well against lefty bats, and they are very lefty bat heavy with guys like Chu, Mazzara, Moreland, Odor, and Fielder, who are all probably going to be playing on Sunday. I really like them against him as a high floor stack. And then the other one is actually, this might end up being a little bit lower owned or a little bit less chalky, but I love Houston against Ian Kennedy. And I think it's going to be really hard to avoid them, both for cash games and GPPs. I mean, I'll definitely be stacking Houston aggressively because I think they will be lower owned. But Ian Kennedy's really, he's been a bit of an anomaly so far this year. He started off very well, But over the last month, here are some numbers that really jump off the page for me. And if you read my column on Moxyball.com, that's the pitching rundown. You'll see every single day that I talk about some of the key things that certain players are doing, or they're progressing, or some of the key changes that they've had over the course of the year that really start to flip things one way or another. And last 30 days is a split I like to look at. And that's usually about 5 starts. And those numbers are a 54% fly ball rate, which is the worst on the slate. And that's absolutely outrageously high. And a 41% hard hit rate given up in that same span. And those are 2 numbers that lead to all kinds of home runs. And we all know that Houston is one of the highest powered offensive teams in the league. They've got some great power top to bottom. They just called up AJ Reed as well, who should be in the lineup and provides a little bit of extra pop over a guy like Tyler White. And so, the other thing that you can't forget too is they're also the hottest team in the the majors right now, entering Saturday's action, anyways, I should say, with the 4-11 team WOBA over the last week. So, kind of put all that together with his struggles with fly balls, with hard hit balls, and facing a hot offense. And I think that you've got a really high floor situation with Houston bats, and I think they're very much worth exploiting on Sunday. Zach, do you have a kind of a lower owned stack that you like in addition to the 2 you mentioned before?
The A's, I mentioned one of the players already. I mentioned how I don't like Hector Santiago. He has a FIP of 5.26, a home run per 9 at 170. He really struggles against righties with a slugging percentage of 473. The A's are only going to have like 1 or 2 left-handed bats in their lineup. So I just think they have a really high floor and a lot of upside. But they're not going to be that owned because people just look at A's and don't really give them any respect.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's some good value there. The other one that I'll give you is the White Sox against Marcus Stroman. He's really struggled lately, and it kind of hurts me to say that as a Toronto fan myself. But the White Sox actually just hit 7 home runs against the Jays on Saturday, and they lost. That was actually only the 3rd time that's ever happened in the history of baseball. Which is crazy. 7 home runs. That's what happens when I guess they're almost all, or actually I think they were all solo home runs, right? Which is kind of crazy because the Jays only hit 1, but they beat them 10-8. Gotta love baseball. So Stroman, even though there's a quality name value, he's been really struggling lately for the Jays. Opponents have a 32% line drive rate, a hard hit rate of 42% over the last month. He does have some high batting average on balls in play that could come down a little bit, but if you watch him and if you kind of see what's been going on, folks are hitting the ball hard and they're finding the holes. A lot of line drives, and that's really a recipe for disaster, especially for a team like the White Sox that are showing that they can swing the bat quite well right now. So I have some concern for Stroman, but that only could mean leverage that in DFS from a White Sox perspective, and I think you're going to get some low owned value in the batter's box. So with that, let's kind of turn away from the slate entirely and focus a little bit on a guy that I just mentioned before, Steven Moya. I'm curious as to what are your thoughts on him the rest of the way? I know I mentioned he's only $2,400 on DraftKings. He'll be probably a little bit more expensive on FanDuel because they tend to weight big performances a little bit heavier from an algorithm perspective, but still probably under $3,000. Are you going to play him on Sunday? And if so, why or why not? And then another thought would be for anyone that from a season-long perspective, what's your approach for them? And if you don't really want to talk about the season-long, just I can happily cover that. But let me know your thoughts on Moya.
I love Moya the rest of the way. He's shown he can hit in the majors. Last year he struggled a little bit, but in 2014 in his limited time, he hit 375. He's tearing the cover off the ball now. He showed in AAA he can hit the ball. I mean, he was slashing 298, 326, 571 with an ISO 273 before getting called back up this season. He's bounced around a little bit between the two. He had 33 home runs in the minors in 2015, 2016 combined. The man can hit. He needs to be owned, especially if you're in a dynasty league. I don't see how Moya's sitting on the free agency wire of your league. And if I need a salary relief, which I'm probably going to need with the pitching on this slate, I'm definitely playing him. Tomlin's allowing lefties to slug 443. Moya's just too good right now for me to ignore at 2,400. And he's probably still going to be 2,500 on FanDuel as well. So he's a very, very cheap play.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, to a certain degree, I'm a little bit less optimistic on him from a season long perspective, and I kind of caution as a bit of helium watch, right? Because he's still got a K rate of almost 30%, which for guys, for those of you that follow it, I mean, that's really not really a very sustainable number unless you're walking 10 or 12% of the time, and he's well below 10%. So I mean. The power is legit, no question about it. The question is going to be, can he make the hard contact and enough contact against righties? And thankfully, he is a lefty, so he gets the better part of the split from a percentage basis of playing time to help you out. I mean, he's a guy I'm not touching in a 12-team, 10-team, 8-team league. There's really no value there. There's going to be far better guys on the waiver wire, I'm sure. But 14 plus or an AL only, for example, and to Zach, your point around a a dynasty or a keeper league, I think he's got some value there. Sunday feels like a day where you have to start him, especially if you start a stud arm or two on the mound because he's so cheap on both sites. But he's someone that I would certainly just caution you to kind of tread carefully as his price goes up slowly but surely in DFS, because that K rate is going to limit the floor. And to a much lower level than you typically want when you're starting to talk about guys that are going to be in the mid-range price category. So be careful there. In the spirit of conservatism, I wanted to share my honest thoughts there, but that doesn't take anything away from him being a very solid value play on Sunday. So a bit of an interesting thought, and I wanted to throw this out there because I like this question. Probably something you can only really look at when you're thinking about trying to find some value on more dynamically priced sites like DraftKings, which tends to really lower their price points against elite arms. Is there, kind of, if you had to start a batter or two against an elite pitcher, what bats or team would you be targeting and why?
Well, I'm going to go more of the ace pitcher that I love to target against, especially in GPPs, and that's Max Scherzer. He's a great pitcher. We all know this, but he gives up home runs at an alarming rate. He has a 1.68 home run to 9 rate ratio this season. He's allowed a home run in all but 2 starts, and he's given up more than 3 runs in 5 of his 16 starts. He's a pitcher that I really like to pick on in GPPs, because you can get the players at great prices and low owned. So if somebody has a high ISO against a right-handed pitcher, I'm going to actually play that player against Max, because he just gives up home runs. So you can find good GPP plays against him. He has the ability to go 20 strikeouts, but he also has the ability to give up 4 or 5 home runs.
Yeah, no, he's your kind of boomer bust guy, right? And it is always interesting on a DraftKings site in particular just to play some bats against him, and I've definitely had some success there over time. Tougher to do if you're not really a multi-entry or multi-lineup GPP player, but I certainly get the sentiment there. I'm going to take that and kind of talk about the Sunday slate in particular to help our listeners. I think that the one guy on Sunday that I have the most confidence, if I had to start someone against them, would actually be Chris Sale. The Jays have been hitting quite well, and Sale, of all the pitchers on the slate that are at that sort of elite level, has been struggling the most. Opponents have a 33% line drive rate against him and a 38% hard hit rate over the last month. And his ERA is actually just hovering around 4. I think it's a little bit over 4.0 in that span. So he's showing that he's a little bit more human than he typically is. His K rate, under 9 over the last month again. And he's not exactly been the same dominant self. So with the way that the Jays are swinging right now, guys like Edwin, Michael Saunders, even though he's a lefty, he tends to hit them extremely well. So don't shy away from him there. Devin Travis hit a home run on Saturday. Russell Martin's been hitting well, had the day off on Saturday as well. So he'll be fresh on Sunday. Like those guys are all, and Josh Donaldson, I can't forget him. Great hitters against lefties, and I think that they'll be under owned for sure, considering they're playing against Sale, and could certainly be a productive stack, because I could see them getting 3, 4, maybe even 5 runs off them. So don't overlook them if you're looking for a bit of low owned value. And I think that if I had to choose something to recommend from start a guy against a stud on Sunday, he'd be the one that I'd pick on.
I agree. I'm not a big fan of Sale this year. I've been writing up about multiple times how I don't think he's a pitcher that you necessarily have to use right now. So definitely want the Blue Jays
Yeah, for sure, and their value is actually quite solid right now when you stack them up against some other options. And just to that point, like I agree with you, Zach. I've always been a little worried about him. Although I mean, I love the skill set, but I've always been concerned, and I've written about it the last couple of years on our site about the way that he relies so much on deception and his arm angle. Like I just worry about that really wearing on him over time. I wouldn't be surprised if over the next couple of years he really starts to regress and maybe even spend some more time in the DL. That's a lot of strain with that kind of delivery. So a little bit of fun to close off our Sunday podcast. What's one crazy prediction that you're going to go out on a limb and share with our listeners?
That the Braves score half a dozen runs on Sunday against Bartolo Colon.
I like it.
The Braves have been hitting the ball a little bit better against right-handed pitchers. Not great, but I just don't believe in Colon. I don't care what his numbers say. He just lets me down too much. I'm going to go with the Braves scoring 6 runs.
Yep, and I think that's fair. I mean, he's not a really big strikeout guy, right? Relies a lot more on movement and ground ball and soft contact to be effective, and he's certainly had his spots of not being effective this year, while conversely he has been pretty decent too. I like that though. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say these two things. They're kind of themed similarly to things that we've talked about. Number one is that I actually think that there's a decent chance that the Jays White Sox game features more runs than Coors. It may sound a little bit crazy, but gives you an idea that, hey, Stroman's struggling, Sale's struggling, both offenses are hitting well. It's not crazy to think that there could be 11, 12, 13 runs scored in that game, which could be in line with Coors, especially if you line up with me in thinking that Bettis and Corbin might actually see their fates and the way that they've been pitching actually kind of show themselves a little bit stronger in the results department. And in conjunction with what I just said there about the Jays White Sox game, it wouldn't surprise me if we finish the Sunday slate and we see Bud Norris with the same or more fantasy points as Chris Sale. And so I should say he is going for Atlanta in this one. It may sound crazy, but against the Jays, Sale could be in tough, like I mentioned, and Norris has actually been throwing really well. He has a better xFIP ERA than Sale over the last month with a near equal K rate. His is just over 8, where Sale's is just under 9. Wouldn't shock me if the Braves do score 5 or 6 runs, like you mentioned, pull out the win. And I think on DraftKings, Norris's last month has been about 16 or 16 and a half fantasy points, while Sales is just around 19. So there's only a 2.5 to 3 point difference right now. The price point is less than half, though. I mean, I think Bud Norris is 5,600 on DK, where Sale is well over 12,000. So Sale for me is a safe fade. Norris is going to be a really interesting value target, especially for GPPs with the way he's throwing at the moment. So those are the two things that I'll go out on a limb and say have a pretty decent chance of happening on Sunday, even though it might sound a little bit insane right now. You never know. You just never know, especially with baseball. It's very, very, very inconsistent. Any other closing thoughts, Zach? All right. Well, let's wrap it up and say thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate your time. Hope you enjoyed what you heard. Give us a follow on Twitter at Moxyball. I'm at Jared's Got Moxie. Zach's at Zach's Got Moxie. Follow us. Take a look at at the website moxyball.com for great fantasy content that we share each and every day. And best of luck out there. Have a great day.